Welcome to Balancy's webinar number 3. My name is Julia. I'm the head of growth at Balancy. And joining me today is Michael Hripin, my colleague and product owner at Balancy. And we also have a very special guest with us today, Nick Murray. Nick, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience and tell about yourself, what you think is important for them to know?
So, hi everyone, I'm Nick. I've been working in free-to-play games for about 15 years. I've basically worked at companies like Rovio on things like Angry Birds 2. I've worked at Gree for a long time on product and live operations. And for the last about 6.5 years, I've been consulting on product, economy, balancing, monetization, all of these kind of areas.
That sounds like a very long journey in the industry, and thank you for joining us today for sharing this expertise with us and with our audience. I will quickly guide everyone through the agenda. So in this session, we will deconstruct the process of pricing items in your game shop to make sure you get the maximum LTV from your player base, and at the same time, do not hurt their game experience, do not hurt the game's balance. And my goal that after this webinar, you will know how to, first of all, calculate pricing for items and bundles. You will know how to work with discounts, with pricing personalizations, and finally, how to incorporate free slots or gifts into your in-game shop. About the format of today's session, it's a live Q&A conversation combined with super short demo parts showcasing the implementation of the mentioned tactics. I've prepared a lot of questions for Nick from myself and also from my industry friends that are developing games, but also feel free to leave your questions in the chat and we will try to answer them all if we have enough time. The approximate timing for this session is around 1 hour, so I hope we will be able to cover all the questions. And without further ado, let's get started. I already see the first question. Will it be recorded? Yes, you will get the recording right after this webinar finishes, so don't worry about this. So first things first. Let's talk how to define pricing points from scratch when you're creating your in-game shop. Let's say if I was to open some business, let's say a clothes store or a coffee shop, the first thing I personally would do is probably to go and check pricing in the neighbor shop or competitor website. I'm very curious if this tactic is helpful in games too.
The simple answer is yes. Obviously, it's a bit more complex than that, but I think it's a really good starting point to be looking at the industry benchmarks, particularly if you have a game type that is already quite saturated. So let's say you want to make a match 3 game. If you have a match 3 game that has an energy system like Candy Crush or Toy Blast or basically any other kind of match 3 game, then like you don't want your pricing to be 3, 5, 10 times higher than theirs to refill your energy. Like the kind of session time that you're looking for should be comparable, which means in this case your pricing is likely to be comparable as well. I think there are risks to it as well. Like you can become too reliant on looking at what others are doing and less at what you could be trying. Because it's worth keeping in mind that like monetization evolves. So does pricing, so does real world pricing. So if you look at a game like, let's take Candy Crush, they've pretty much consistently like charged same amount more or less for a life refill. But that game's 12 years old now. Like, and the cost of living has gone up for everybody. The cost of many things has gone up for everybody. So looking at Candy Crush might actually not be as relevant to then understand what your pricing should look like. And there's one more thing that I would add on this, which is, things like pricing evolves depending on the game's lifetime. So where you start your pricing and where you finish your pricing after 5 years of running that game, they're likely to be not the same value. So I think it's a good idea to look at benchmarks and look at competitors, but just be cautious about the data you're taking from them and understand the context in which it is.
Yeah.
Nick, could I ask you about you mentioned that these guys are having mostly the same prices for 12 years, and the cost of living is growing. So basically, we can understand it as the game became cheaper. Does it mean that players will pay more?
No, I don't think so. I mean, because the game became cheaper in terms of real world money conversion, but realistically, not everybody's salaries increased at the same time, at the same rate. I guess people might play or might pay more if their salary is tied to inflation. But I think this is a slightly different topic to be getting into. Um, but I don't think realistically people are going to end up paying that much more. I think more likely, I mean, keep in mind, Candy Crush itself has evolved over the years. You know, they have added new systems and new sinks for currencies. So they're finding new ways to monetize on top of a kind of base live system that they can largely leave alone, I think.
Thank you.
There was actually one more tip that I found online while preparing for this webinar, and I'm curious about your opinion on this one. So when analyzing competitors' pricing, it's recommended to and interesting to check the most common price points used on the game's most valuable items, and especially on the items that were recently introduced in the game, because this might be likely an indicator of which prices they have found to be the most effective in terms of revenue generation. So what do you think about it? Like to track how prices change, finding this most common pricing points, newly introduced pricing points.
Yeah, so for the common price points, it can make sense. I mean, honestly, I feel like when you're defining a pricing structure, the best is that the audience can quickly look at it and understand it. And I think there's a reason that the most common pricing structure tends to be kind of easily divided. So, for example, usually there's like a $5 price point, a $10 price point, a $20 price point. Those three are easy to see the value proposition of each. I can see that, okay, if I buy the $10 price point, I get probably more than twice as much as the $5 price point, and the same with the $20 price point and $10 price point. So I think that makes sense because as a as a potential buyer, you don't want friction. You want to look at the store and go like, okay, I've got about this much money. That's the best deal for me. I can see clearly that this is going to be the price point that I want to purchase at. And regarding adding new items and like understanding the value there, I think that is an interesting thing to do. All I would say is again, unless the game is kind of one for one what you're trying to do, and that's unlikely, I would exercise caution because they might have this, like, they might be introducing this as part of a larger update. They might be introducing an upgrade mechanic, which is going to be critical for, let's say, a social guild war or something they have coming down the line. And that could be like them trying to get people on board with the system and not actually trying to monetize that system to its maximum potential. So it's worth trying to understand the context of this as well and not just go, okay, that's a new thing that they've put out, I should try and do the same.
Is it a valid approach to go to your audience directly and like take a focus group and interview some people from your target audience about their spending behavior, about their spending habits, what kind of pricing point they find good, and how they actually spend money in games?
You could, but you'd have to talk to a lot of people to make it statistically significant. Um, and people aren't always the most honest about their spending habits in mobile games. Um, for some people, they don't mind at all. For others, it can be a source of shame. So it's quite difficult to actually find like reliable data from this without going, like I said, and getting kind of hundreds, if not thousands, of users to provide their spending data. You would be better, honestly, looking probably at just aggregated spending data that you get from major platforms or other services to help understand a bit more about how people spend. And it would cost you less as well.
So to sum up, all these approaches, they can be kind of useful to a certain extent. You can analyze competitors, you can ask your target audience, but your ultimate objective is not just to copy your competitors or not just to listen to what everyone says, but to find your own best model for your game that will work for your game. And how do we do that? Like, Nick, share with us some formula or step-by-step instruction how to create a price point for a game item.
Yeah, there's no formula, unfortunately, but there's rather a list of considerations that I would always recommend. So these considerations are like what the competition is doing. That's what we've already discussed. Your audience, like if you're targeting, kind of Gen Z, younger generations of users, they're going to typically have less disposable income. If your target market is kind of 35 to 45-year-old men and women, like there's usually a bit more flexibility. They have more disposable income. So your pricing should reflect your audience to some degree. And I think a lot of games make the mistake of putting it out, finding an audience, and then trying to kind of nudge pricing around afterwards. If you can understand who your audience is supposed to be in advance, then you stand a better chance of adapting your economy for it. The other factors here are time. So when you design an economy, people have different approaches of how they look at economy design. Personally, I focus on time-based economy. So that is to say, I look at how long, like literally in terms of minutes and seconds, it should be before a player should approximately level up. And what does that level up mean? That means they gain this much currency. So how, with that much currency, what is their purchasing power going to be at this point? How is that going to affect how they upgrade their character or how they progress in base building or whatever your game loop looks like? So the time it takes to actually progress and to unlock and to potentially gain hard currency is also really key in terms of understanding what your pricing is going to look like, because basically you're selling shortcuts, right? Like when you sell hard currency bundles, typically you're selling time to players. You're basically saying, here, look, you don't want to wait around for this timer. You don't want to wait until you can like grind out these legendary shards. You can buy some hard currency now, and then you can get what the things you need right now. Um, so it's important to consider how difficult it is and how long it takes to get those things if you're not spending. And that will help you understand what is valuable and what isn't in terms of your pricing. And the last thing I would just add on, like considering how to build your pricing is also kind of newness, is rarity. So obviously, like mobile games are kind of closed markets. No one's going to introduce a product into your game that you're not aware of or that is in competition with you. So when you introduce items, you can make fanfare about it. You can make sure that it's the most exciting thing, and that creates value in itself. So, Yulia, you mentioned earlier about introducing new items at specific price points. I mean, if I were introducing a new item, I would make sure that it was, yeah, like well publicized. It was a big, exciting thing, so that like players have an expectation that this is a thing of value, and that actually does have a knock-on effect on then pricing.
We've actually got a question from our audience, which I think you partially answered, but let's just read it out. Maybe you want to add something. It's the question from Sebastian. Hi, Sebastian. How do you link value in real money with game value? Time, interest, social value, and so on.
So I guess this is where the benchmarking part can help a bit more, because a lot of this work is typically done for you. You can understand the game time for many games just by playing them on a semi-regular basis. You can actually just time yourself, like how long is your average session, how many sessions per day. You can typically also find this information out through other platforms. And then you can equate that to, okay, so this is the game time. And then if I were to purchase, what could I skip in terms of this game time in that game? Basically, like it would really just be like a side-by-side comparison. And yeah, looking at other game benchmarks can help you on this. It can be difficult if your game is maybe has an atypical kind of core loop. So like maybe the time spent is kind of much less, but is far more engaging. So like you would have less time per session, but you'd have far more sessions per day. That could like create a slightly different looking model for you. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like using benchmarks, looking at time, looking at kind of newness and rarity, and thinking about your audience is really like the most advice I can add on that, short of actually kind of building the economy. Yeah.
Thank you. And one more question again, I will read it out because I think it's also connected to this topic that we're discussing right now. So it's the question from Paolo. How do you estimate the value of boosters and power-ups in games where the skill is more important than time, like in match 3 games, to reach the right spend depth?
That's a tough question. And hi, Paolo, by the way. So yeah, I would say that's pretty difficult because match 3, I would say that the skill isn't necessarily more important than time. Like it's kind of a mix, right? Like there's a certain amount of randomness. Also, there's an increasing trend towards kind of customization of levels and difficulty on a player-by-player basis, so you don't churn out. But basically, I think the value of boosters and power-ups comes from the economy that's built around them. In my experience, there's a lot of match 3 games that take you through different phases of, okay, we're going to introduce this booster and then we're going to give you 10 of them, and then we're going to introduce this booster and we're going to give you 10 of them as well to try and get you to use them. But I think there are a lot of people, myself included, who don't really bother with the boosters until I hit a wall. So to my mind, I would say that you should really be looking at your difficulty curve, trying to make sure that like there are hard levels that encourage the use of boosters earlier on, and also keep a firmer grasp on the amount of boosters you give out in the early stages so you're not saturating the economy with them. In terms of reaching the right spend depth with this, I don't know what the right spend depth looks like for boosters. I think it's part of the things that people can buy in match 3 games, but typically I feel like people will always buy more moves because it's more of a guarantee. I think boosters are probably less purchased, but I'm not an expert on match 3, I'll say.
I think Paolo means LTV under this like spend depth, right? Spend depth. Maybe they have some target LTV there, and they consider it right spending. So how to reach that right point?
I wouldn't rely on boosters to reach a target LTV. That's the thing. I don't
Unless
think
you're totally controlling your gameplay, which means controlling your booster spend, actually.
Yeah, but I think there are risks when people feel like the game is working against them and trying to force them constantly into using boosters. So I think it needs to be done carefully. But again, even in a match 3 game, I wouldn't rely purely on boosters as a system to reach a high target LTV. I think at this point you realistically need to have a deeper meta game in order to sufficiently monetize, particularly when you're thinking about match 3, which is a very saturated segment with very high CPI. Yeah.
There is actually one more point when deciding about the pricing that I think everyone should think about always is pricing localization, because Not every player, not in every country, are ready to pay the same amount of money, right? So do we all agree here that by default, it's the best practice is to localize the pricing for different countries, or there is something to add to that?
I mean, I think it's useful for sure because purchasing power is different in different countries. Um, I have in the past run though live games where it's been exploited. So, for example, it was I think it was tied to currency in Venezuela, which crashed at some point, and basically, like, can't remember exactly how it worked, but people were using like a VPN basically to exploit and get like hard currency at a much cheaper rate, even though they weren't based in that country. So, in general, yes, it's great that you can target more users in that way, but keep in mind that your players never really want to spend, and if they can find a way of like hacking around it and getting good value and getting cheaper rates, then that's what they're going to do.
Also, you have to consider that players are talking to each other. So they can share this information easily through Facebook or whatever, or your own website. So it depends on game genre. If it's multiplayer, they will definitely communicate, especially if it has some guilds or clans. So if you will have localized prices, I think you will have to think about localizing these communities. So these people will not interact with people from different locales with different prices. So they will not be, how to say, offended by those who can spend more and have some advantage.
I mean, actually, this is the topic that we will touch upon a bit later when we talk about personalization. I think this topic that you, Mike, is mentioning is actually like very relevant for the topic of the pricing personalization. What I personally think about localization of pricing is it's more or less understandable thing. I mean, I wouldn't be upset that I have to pay more, let's say in Spain, than a player from Brazil. Like for me, it's kind of like, okay, I know that the economy situation is different. And for me as a player, I wouldn't be upset. Although I could use it potentially as a opportunity for cheating. That's true.
On that level, actually, the platforms do this job for us. Apple controls these price points on their side. So actually, it's done by default. But the question is if the game developer needs to do something extra on top of it.
In the past, I was working at a company where we had specific sales on currency in different regions to make sure that we were fitting in with more significant cultural events. And that was actually a really effective way to like boost spend, boost conversion. Um, but yeah, like doing kind of localized sales, really, I would only suggest doing for your bigger territories, because otherwise it's a lot of resources to take into account every cultural event from every country and then put that into a gigantic calendar, particularly when, let's say you're going to have kind of 5 or 6 maybe main spending territories in the first place.
By the way, I have a question. Maybe it's a bit like a very simple question, but I'm very curious. So, is there any standard, like a table with all these coefficients of pricing for different countries, or does every company develop their own and decide on their own coefficients for different countries?
As Mike said, it's usually handled by the platforms, right? So I know that there were App Store pricing matrices and stuff like that out there that you can check. But yeah, I don't think you even need to really do that anymore. I think it's basically all kind of done for you.
But you have an option to establish your own kind of like Big Mac index. You can have something that you will compare against any country in any country. So you can estimate like your value of your hard currency in Big Macs, for example.
There is, by the way, I've missed a comment from Paolo. He clarified about the spend depth. So with spend depth, I mean the maximum amount of money a whale can invest into the game if they want to buy everything out. It's a way of calculating the potential of a free-to-play game. Anyway, thanks for the answer. So I think we've covered that question. And there is one more question from Sebastian. Often you spend more time and resources trying to control than actually making a real revenue difference. So is it really worth doing it versus a more fair economy across territories?
I mean, again, I think it's worth investing in doing more event-based stuff on specific territories because it feels more culturally significant. People are more likely to convert and spend. Having a totally different, like kind of localized pricing setup is fine if it's not time consuming and if it's not actively damaging, then I think it can be beneficial. But as you say, if you are having to control it on a kind of daily, weekly basis and make tweaks and try and optimize here and there, then yes, at some point you're counting pennies instead of actually generating significant revenue.
By the way, let me remove actually the agenda. I think everyone has learned it by heart already, and let's focus maybe more on our faces. And I suggest also to discuss the second very important topic, the discounts, right? So let's say when we are defining pricing from the very beginning, should we imply that they will be discounted later on? That is, should I on purpose maybe create ridiculously high pricing points to later be able to discount them? What do you think about this?
I wouldn't create ridiculously high price points. I mean, I understand there's a viable argument for saying, okay, I'm going to put my pricing a bit higher. I think it's too high, but I'm going to reduce it over time because it's something that you can experiment with in the early stages, particularly in soft launch, for example. But you also risk upsetting players if you start putting things that are too high. Like people will just bounce off the game if they see, like if I come in and I see, okay, it's going to cost me €5 to refill my energy, I'm just not going to pay that. It's also not going to be realistically in line with the pricing structure that we talked about earlier and how you define your pricing with time, with audience, and all of those things. So I don't think it makes that much sense to go crazy with it, but you can absolutely experiment. And then one more thing on this is actually just about buyer's remorse. Like if you purchase something, like if people actually do purchase it and then you drop the price a day or two later by a significant amount, they're going to be very unhappy. Um, I I've had similar experiences even just with like premium game platforms when you buy a game and then it's discounted the next day. It feels quite negative. I think it was actually on Epic Game Store one time though where I did buy something and then it was discounted within 48 hours and they actually sent me an email and refunded me the difference. Like there are definitely ways that you can like create valued customers by keeping an eye on this because otherwise you're just going to upset them.
Yeah, so there should be some reasonable approach to that. Probably, of course, you should be keeping in account that later on you will be conducting sales and probably you will be discounting items, but also trying to stay ethical and reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, I think most audiences understand, in particularly soft launch audiences, they don't tend to be the primary territories where you're actually like looking for sales and stuff anyway. Um, if you're really pushing on sales in soft launch, then you're starting to open up probably tier one markets. And therefore, like, yes, you can start having some slightly higher price points, but a lot of the time in soft launch, at least or in early stages, you're trying to appeal and trying to engage audiences, usually from tier 2 markets, I would say. So again, I think putting too high price points is just going to like scare them away rather than engage them in the game.
And how do I know that actually the pricing point has been selected wrongly? Like, what are the indicators?
I mean, nobody buys it. That's a pretty good indicator.
I mean, it's something no one needs. That is by the
Yeah,
way.
I mean, well, the thing is, if no one needs an item that you have in game, then that's really an issue of game design at some point. Could be an issue of difficulty curve as well. But it's primarily related to game design. Whenever you're trying to sell something, you're always trying to like give value to the player. Like you're always trying to make sure that they feel like, okay, I've bought something and I don't regret it. Like this has helped me actively. It's enhanced my experience in some way. So I think that's the kind of mindset to take here.
And when would be a good moment to start sales and discounting? Like, what is this moment? And how do you decide what to discount and by how much?
So in terms of when, I guess a lot of that will depend on it depends on a lot of factors, to be honest, and some of them are external to the game as well. Like sometimes I've had it in the past where I've been in part of teams where we've just had to push on sales, and it's partly for the survival of the company and avoiding layoffs and everything, which is an increasing risk in this industry, it seems. So um, like sometimes you need to start these things independent of what's happening in the game. If we focus on the game level, though, I would say it depends on the stage of lifetime that the game is in, but it depends also on your overall strategy for content. I use a structure called PLM for this, which is Product Lifecycle Management. And basically, it means that if I introduce a piece of content to the game, I want it, let's say it's I don't know, new fancy armor for an RPG. I want that to be a thing that is kind of valued and desired. So I'm not going to put it out and then a week later put it on sale because that's going to devalue it. It's going to make it seem like it wasn't worth all that much. There's going to be buyer's remorse, like I talked about. Realistically, you want to put it into like a system that is going to monetize at a high level, such as a leaderboard based competition where you're giving away just a few at the highest ranks of that. And then maybe you devalue it slightly, you increase the potential audience by putting it in, let's say, a competition where there's a high milestone reward and you can get the armor. And then you move it down a step and you, again, broaden the audience. You put it in a gacha that costs like real money, maybe. And then all of this is done. So basically, the idea is you're creating a kind of chain of different steps. At each one, you are expanding the audience for the product and at the same time reducing its value slightly. And this is all over a period of time. So you can say, okay, for this piece of content, or for armors in the game, we want them to last for 3 months. At the beginning of the 3 months, they're going to be in the super premium, super like high spending competitive competition. And at the end of the 3 months, they're going to be down here. And that's going to be in, let's say, the kind of regular gacha that people can open on a daily basis. And that's how really you should think about also starting sales and discounts on the item is like reducing its value over time, but in like whilst increasing the potential audience. So the risk if you don't do this is that you leave money on the table, right? If I've got five, whales or big spenders or super fans or however you want to describe them, they are prepared to spend maybe hundreds of dollars on getting this one thing. So with that in mind, I'm not going to immediately put it into a gacha chest because maybe they get it after $50. It would be better to put it into this high competition where they can compete for it, spend those hundreds of dollars, and then gradually, as I say, shift it down this life cycle strategy, increasing the audience, decreasing the value. So that's, I hope that kind of explains a bit as to when to start sales and discounts. In terms of the actual scale of discounts, I mean, this is something that you need to look at by validating. You need to validate your approach with your data, basically. Like understand things like item saturation, item usage, like item usage by player segment, by player level, by different buckets of spenders. All of these kind of things can really help you to understand, okay, like which items are working in which groups and which ones maybe not so much. And if they're not so much, then you can start experimenting with doing some sales. When you do
Mhm.
sales, sorry, I've got a lot to say on this
No,
particular subject.
please share your knowledge with us.
Um, So when you do your sales, it's really important to include estimated value. So estimated value is basically the like the kind of retail price, or like your base price divided by the promotional price that you have. And then you put it as a percentage. So for example, if I do let's say 2 for 1 on an item, that's going to have 200% estimated value. The point of this is that on an item or on a bundle or on, specific price points, you can look at the correlation between how much additional revenue you're making from that item versus the estimated value. So if I'm giving away 500% estimated value, I logically expect that players are going to purchase that more than if I'm giving away 150%. Right? It's more than 3 times the value of that other bundle. So I would expect there to be a result. And basically, you just plot a kind of graph of like revenue impact versus estimated value, and you'll see very quickly which items are working at what level of discount. So I can see, for example, that if I want to buy, say, a legendary shard of something, um, like I've sold that at a bunch of different estimated values. I've sold it, so giving away 125% value, 180% value, and 300. I need to see a correlation that shows me that actually, like the 300 is worth giving away that much value for that price. Because if the sales aren't significantly better than 180%, then why would I do it? Then I'm giving away too much value and I'm leaving money on the table. So keeping in mind your estimated value is really, really like the most important thing I could say about like your live ops strategy in this way.
Yeah, there is this very important topic and point that you're mentioning is about leaving money on the table, not getting the maximum value from your player base. And I think the topic of pricing personalization and discount personalization is tightly connected to this. So, of course, discounts are a great tactic to boost your sales, to boost conversions. But if you go too hard on them, if you give too big discounts, unnecessary discounts, unnecessarily big, you may lose revenue due to hangover effect, for example, after the sale. And even if you don't go in minus, there is still a chance you could have earned more, right? So I know that in searches for optimal discount, many developers turn to personalized or dynamic discounts, and that means that you might be willing to give a bigger discount to players, for example, that have never paid before, and your goal is to convert them, versus your paying players that are ready to pay, and maybe you should give them like a smaller discount, and that would be sufficient. So I know that Mike actually has worked with such cases before, and he knows how to approach this not only from the design perspective, but also from the technical point of view. And I think this also would answer the question of Sebastian, how do you manage targeted discounts? Because I think that Sebastian needs this personalized targeted discounts here.
We all need them. Thanks, Yulia. I think I will do some 2 minutes, 5 minutes demo using our Balancy platform. Could you please share my screen? Thank you very much. So this is our dashboard, and we see that I already pre-set up some events here. So let's go and see what game events I can show you as an example. So usually discounting events last for some limited time. So let's imagine that we have some weekend sale event which runs on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And during this period, we will apply some logic or some algorithm for personalization. We will run the script here, and the script will use segmentation based on pair capacity. For example, for non-pairs or low spenders, we can set higher discount for this particular weekend sale offer, because we know that it's hard for them to make a decision to buy. But for those who already paid us some significant amount, for example, like about 150 here, we can make this discount lower because we already know that they are willing to pay. They are fine with these amounts of money to be spent. So we can put less discount. And for those who spend even more, we can provide some like complementary discount, small, but they can feel it. And for those who don't count money at all, we will not give any discount. So after this logic, we will have this discount chosen for this particular player who runs this script, and then we will activate the offer with this discount here. So in this way, players from different payment segments will have the same offer with different discounts. It's personalized on segment basis. Let's take a look to another possible approach. For example, we can have an event which will have a special offer targeted only to non-payers. And because they are non-payers, they didn't pay anything with us. We know that they didn't buy this offer as well. This could be also tied to their ad watching behavior. As an example, I created this cycle, which goes round and round with eventually increasing the amount of discount. So, for example, for those who are non-payer, we will try to convert them 4 times in a row. This node here will run 4 times, and it will check the amount of ads, rewarded ads watched, with some multipliers just to calculate the discount amount. So for the first cycle, the amount will be small because they watched less ads. But if they didn't buy it, if it ended without purchasing, we will wait for some time and go back to the loop. So on the next iteration, we will check if they watched more ads, so the discount will grow, and they might purchase it on the second attempt. If not, we will do third attempt, fourth attempt, and discount will grow. So if they not converting in 4 attempts, okay, we pass.
We'll leave them alone, okay?
Yeah, we'll leave them alone, and maybe we will try some other tactic here using like any other kind of events. For example, welcome pack. Uh, Here we can target the whole event on the moment when this individual player reaches level 5. And if they not purchase this welcome pack, we will offer them this welcome pack. Using this script, we will wait for the level, becoming level 5. We will offer them welcome pack with no discount at all. And if they purchase this with no discount, okay, it's good for us. But if they didn't buy it without discount, we will wait for some time and we will try to make it offer again, just one more time. But this time we will calculate the discount again, for example, based on this amount of ads watched, assuming that during this time of waiting, they continued to watch some ads. So they like are eligible for discount for that activity. So the second time, the same offer, will be discounted, and maybe they will convert from the second attempt. This is kind of different tactics that could be easily achieved using visual scripting and conditions based on segmentation or some even personal achievements like reaching a particular level, for example. That's it.
Thank you, Mike. I have one question, which I'm sure like these are awesome tactics, and I see that they're so easily implemented with the platform. But I think many people, and including Sebastian, have this question: how fair is this perceived by players? Like I have no doubts these tactics work, but if players find out about it, is there a high possibility? Maybe there were stories from your practice, how you dealt
Hmm.
with them.
Honestly, I don't have any experience when players were able to discover these algorithms, personalization algorithms that were underneath it. Uh, they usually tend to develop some uh, theories about this, but most of the time they are not correct. So we just keep it secret, and if it's working, we don't fix it until it's broken. So most of the time it works, and we just keep going.
I just
Nick,
add,
what
I
about
mean,
you?
if you like think about communities of games that you've maybe worked on, um, how many players really talk to each other, particularly when it concerns again spending behavior, which, as I said, for some people is, even a slightly shameful thing. People get accused of spending and it's a negatively perceived thing sometimes. So they typically actually don't talk to each other that much. Maybe you have, community pages on Facebook or forums where people are talking a bit more, or Reddit. But actually, like it's a minority of your players, a very small minority of your players. Um, and the ones who complain the most are the loudest, but tend to also be the fewest. Most people don't really mind about this stuff in my experience. And a lot of the time, the purchases that you're making will be, I mean, they'll be personalized, but I don't think they will have kind of wide ranging ramifications on the rest of the community or other players. It's more about your personal progress in the game. So I don't think it really creates too much problem, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you guys. And last but not least, I would like to ask about free items and gifts in the game. You may ask, what's the value of giving away items that you can actually sell? And that it's actually a great tactic to make your players more happy, more engaged, more often visiting your in-game shop, and for them to try the premium experience of the game, which they later might be willing to repeat. Uh, are there any recommendations that you can give on how to give away, what to give away, and how much to give away?
Yeah, so firstly, make sure that it's capped, obviously, because again, people like to find holes and exploit them, and particularly when you're giving away stuff for free, people will always try and find an exploit to get more of it. Um, I think combining with an ad is a really useful thing here. I mean, most of my work is really with IAPs, but like ads are a perfectly viable way to generate additional revenue, and particularly when you have a kind of deeper economy game, you can usually actually you can make it so that it's less unbalanced and like close the gap a bit in between like, players at the very top of the game and who are doing all the like highest level activities and all that stuff, and players who are a bit lower down and who are kind of making their way up. You can start giving them things that are, maybe in your product lifecycle management strategy have become totally like out of favor, or, aren't interesting to the top level anymore, but could really help someone who's starting out. So I think giving away free stuff in your shop is a really good tactic. It also obviously gets eyes on the shop. People are more likely to see and pay attention to the other packs that are available there. Yeah, for me, it feels like quite an easy thing to recommend. Obviously, again, keeping an eye on value all the time and what you're giving away.
Yeah, and since we have actually Balancy platform opened, Mike, maybe you can just in 1 minute show how to make a free slot in the in-game shop, how to give away things.
Sure, let's do it. So we have this demonstration of the shop. We have a few sections here, sections with gem packs for IAPs, section of goals for gems, section of bundles for AIPs, and we have a section for special deals. And I think this would be the best place for offering some free gift that will lure people to the shop, to this section, and they will have a lot of opportunities to see some additional packs like this pack or welcome pack or something else. So first of all, we have to decide what we will give away. I would give away some soft currency, which is always needed, for example. So let's assume we already have set up these items here, and we have this soft currency, gold, and let's use it to give for free. Here we have store items, which are basically the lists of items that people will get by paying this price. We have here gold for ad. You might see it before in the shop. So let's create another one, which will be about free gold. I have some predefined localized string here, and the price you see it's by default is free, but we can choose some AIPs, and we will set it for free this time, and we will give away these gold, like let's say 100 of gold. So we have this store item, and then we go to game store, and we will add the store slot here with this free gold store item. And let's put it here as a comparison to ads. So this 100 of gold will be given for free. But as Nick mentioned, we definitely have to limit it somehow. So we have this option. Let's go deeper to the settings, and we have a logic for store slot, which can be periodic. So let's limit this free gift to be given only one time per day. And after that, we are done here. And since we have this one for ads, and ads are actually something that brings us revenue, we can give it away more frequently. So let's add another period here, and maybe let's give it away every like 10 minutes. Oh, this one per every 10 minutes, but for watching one ad. And that's it.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, that looks pretty simple, and it's definitely a great tactic to encourage your players to visit your in-game shop and to make them more happy. We will be soon finishing this webinar, but I just want to make sure that we've answered all the questions that we had in the chat. And I see one question that we haven't answered yet. It's from Sebastian, and it's about inflation. So for each price point, how often do you revise your content value because of inflation? For example, increase in number of credits in a pack.
So it's not something that I would recommend doing often because, again, changing your pricing often leads to, I think, players feeling like they're either missing out or they've overspent, etc. But it is something that you can definitely consider doing. My preference, though, is when dealing with issues about inflation, is really to focus on live operations. At Gree, for example, we were running a game called Dragon Soul, and in Dragon Soul, we basically had the ability to create kind of competitions with milestone rewards and leaderboard rewards and everything, but we could actually tie the criteria for, you know, gaining experience in these events to using resources. So in order to like desaturate the market, we could actually push people to upgrade their troops or to spend gold or to spend these other currencies tied to other systems. And it was an excellent way of basically making a trade of saying, okay, we're going to get you to burn a lot of currency during this event, and in return, we're going to give you some items and some like kind of more useful, tangible things instead of you just sitting on stacks of currency. So I would focus firstly on like getting like currency a bit out of it, like out of the economy, or like removing the excess from the economy. And then yeah, you can also look at like kind of rejigging your price points a bit, but I wouldn't do that too often. Like maybe that's a thing that you can review once every 6 to 12 months.
Makes sense. And we have 1 minute and one last question from Yelena. Are these individual price targeting tactics even legal? Aren't they dark patterns?
That's a good question. I don't believe it's illegal at this point to do anything like this. But honestly, I mean, legality in this stuff tends to vary from country to country. As far as I'm aware, I mean, I'm based in Germany, and the EU has not taken a stance on this particular behavior.
And I would add, let's think about the real world, like retail shop. Would you like to be treated individually, personally, by some consultant or some people, staff from there, or just on the regular basis? It's up to you to answer to this question, and maybe your target audience is willing to have this experience of being personally treated.
Because there is always a chance you get higher discount, right? Not only lower discount.
Of course, and here is a huge topic about loyalty programs, by the way.
Well, this is the thing, actually. So I think in reference to this being a dark pattern, I would say it could it could look like that if you were increasing the prices specifically for certain people. But I think the reality is that the kind of customization we're talking about today is very much you have your baseline pricing of 100%, and then we're dropping it at different rates for different types of people.
But not
and
only
my knowledge,
discounts. By personalization, we also mean that we have a chance to make an offer to some person at some given moment where in general we didn't have a chance to give it. So this may increase revenue just by proposing something in the right time, at the right place.
Something that is relevant to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree also with Nick that generally we're speaking here about discounts. So it's kind of, I don't think that people are going to be upset about getting a bit smaller or a bit bigger discount. Yeah, guys, thank you very much for this session. Nick, it was absolutely lovely to have you here today with us. And Mike, thank you for your insights and for the demos that you have shown us. And of course, thank you, audience, for listening to us. There will be a recording of this webinar if you want to access it later on. And yeah, thank you, everyone, for attending today's session. We will wrap it up. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. It was a
so
pleasure.
much.
See you next time.
So yeah, have a good day.